Welcome to Harris Hall. A few minutes late. We had a little bit of technical difficulty. We'll reconvene this Board of County Commissioners on our April 11th Board of County Commissioners meeting. It's our regular session. And Mr. Mokrajewski, how are you doing this afternoon?
Great, thank you.
We did a lot of work this morning and got down to the point where we can take 3 hours on this item if we need to. So if you're all ready, we can do that. So we'll move directly into our 130, which is number 11A. Public Works is a third reading on ordinance on ordinance number PA 1388 in the matter of adopting an ordinance establishing urban reserves for the City of Eugene, amending the Eugene-Springfield Metropolitan Area General Plan, amending the County Rural Comprehensive Plan, amending the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, amending the Public Facilities and Services Plan with a series of citations. And Mr. Mokrajewski, I'll ask if you will introduce your panel.
Thank you, Chair. Lindsay Eichner is a principal planner for Lane County, so I'll turn over to Lindsay to handle this item.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Today we are here, as Chair Farr mentioned, for deliberations on the ordinance PA 1388 for Eugene Urban Reserves. And with me today, I have Rebecca Gershow, who has been the project manager for the City of Eugene. And I will hand the presentation at this point over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you,
Hi, Rebecca.
Chair Farr, Board of Commissioners. Thanks for having us back today. We have a pretty brief presentation for you today, so we can leave plenty of time for deliberations and for questions that you may have. We're going to do a brief refresher on the process that we've undertaken and the Urban Reserves Adoption Package. We're going to review the staff response to testimony memo that's in your packet as attachment 1, and the Planning Commission recommendations and next steps. And the Board of Commissioners will then deliberate and consider taking action on an ordinance, as we've discussed, establishing urban reserves for the City of Eugene. So you've seen this process diagram before, but for those tuning in today, we want to provide a brief refresher as to why we're here and to the work to date. Urban Reserves planning began in 2018. It has been a joint project with City of Eugene and Lane County. It's included rigorous technical analysis and suitability analysis components, including 18 meetings with the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee, 5 in-person open houses, a 1,500 participant online open house, and almost 30 meetings with elected and appointed officials. A range of urban reserve options were developed, and in fall of 2020, the Lane County Board of Commissioners and the Eugene City Council both directed staff to initiate the adoption process for the 27-year urban reserve option. An adoption package was assembled that I'll share again in a moment, and the public adoption process began last fall with meetings with both planning commissions, including mailing almost 4,000 public notices. Following the joint City Council Board of Commissioners public hearing that took place on February 28th, the Eugene City Council last night adopted their urban reserve ordinance as proposed, and the Lane County Board of Commissioners are now considering final adoption of their urban reserve ordinance. So this is the adoption package, the different components again. It was included in the packet of materials for your first reading on February 7th. It's also in the binders here that you can see, which have also been in the board office and available to the public at the Land Management Division offices. As a courtesy, the complete adoption package is also accessible to the public on the Urban Reserves webpage. Ordinance number 1388, establishing urban reserves for the City of Eugene, includes amendments in 4 different plans, as shown here, 11 different intergovernmental agreements regarding coordinated planning between City of Eugene and Lane County, and with 10 different statutory special districts whose boundaries are included in urban reserves. It also includes legal findings, which includes 5 appendices containing our urban reserve study, technical analysis summary, public engagement summary, and other documents. This is our map of the proposed urban reserves. It includes just over 5,900 developable acres, which are again expected to provide a 27-year supply of developable land, covering a planning period of 2032 to 2059. As directed, this urban reserve does not include the study area's highest value farmland or those adjacent properties with higher value soils. So again, your attachment 1 is the staff response to urban reserve public testimony and elected officials' questions. The date on that is March 24th. It responds to the questions that were raised at the February joint elected officials public hearing and written testimony, including 2 questions from elected officials. Overall, we received about 75 submissions at the time of publication, and the testimony has been fairly evenly split between those in support of urban reserves, those with concerns, and those with questions or general input. The 16-page memo in your packet, it covers questions related to how we treated different habitat types and wetlands, our Goal 5 analysis for urban reserves and how we propose to do it for the UGB, how we counted developable land, middle housing, questions related to the Metro Plan, and some property-specific questions. So instead of walking through the entire memo, we want to make sure there's enough time for your questions in order to help with your deliberations. In addition, some of the testimony that we received was previously discussed with the planning commissions prior to their recommendation, so that memo is also included as A1. That says C1, that's incorrect. That's from the Eugene packet, so it's attachment A1 in your packet, or 1A, excuse me. So overall, there were a number of very good questions raised, and this process gave staff the opportunity to further explain some important information that needed more clarification. However, none of the testimony received necessitated adjustments to the proposed adoption package. The staff response memo references the places in the analysis and in state law where these issues have been addressed, and it also provides additional clarification. We're happy to discuss any of it. City and county staff were able to review the memo with the DLCD staff last week, including their housing and Goal 5 specialists. It was a very productive meeting. We shared the response to testimony with them, and they were very positive in their feedback related to the urban reserves analysis and the approach that we've taken. So this past December, the Lane County Planning Commission, consistent with the Eugene Planning Commission, unanimously passed a motion recommending that the Lane County Board of Commissioners approve the proposed urban reserve adoption package, which meets the needs of approximately 27 years of growth, with specific changes that responded to the public testimony received. The Urban Reserves Ordinance under consideration by the board includes these changes that were recommended by the Planning Commission. So next steps. As I said, the council and board are deliberating separately. Last night, the Eugene City Council adopted their urban reserve ordinance as proposed with a vote of 7-1. There was a lively discussion, and we're looking forward to hearing from you today.
And
Sorry.
yes, and so I would just say that the staff recommendation continues to be recommend adoption of the package, adoption package and ordinance as presented in the packet. And we are available for any questions.
Excellent. I suspect there are going to be a few, including the ones that you had a sidebar with a few moments ago. So turn it over to the board. Any questions at this point? I have a series of them, but I'll look to the board for questions. Commissioner Lovell.
Yeah, thank you. Great. I mean, based on the stack of those notebooks, y'all have been pretty busy and not sleeping much, so thank you very much for your time and your expertise. And thanks for answering the question that I proposed last time. I think it was a very detailed question. I still have some tiny questions to add to that. As you know, most of the things we do in life, we spend 90% of our time making something 10% better. So here we are. So we're going to spend a little more time making it hopefully better. The question that I have is, last time I asked was what really of the land that we're having set aside is truly developable? And thanks for answering that again. The last comment you made in my answer was, unfortunately, the city of Eugene is surrounded by areas that impose higher development costs. So that answered some of my question right there, is that proposed lands that we're going to develop in the future are going to cost us all more. So I guess for just my overview, without asking all of the questions right up front, is I think it's going to be really helpful for us moving forward if some of the lands that are in question, with some of the people that have made public comments and some of the, esteemed attorneys that have put some notes in our boxes as well, I think it's really going to be important that we do a parcel by parcel kind of identifying in some of these lands. I say that for two reasons. One is some of the people that we're dealing with now that are dealing with land management and divisions have embarked on trying to develop lands that they assumed based on other lands around them were developable, and somehow they get down the path a ways and, multi-thousands of dollars into litigation, and they find out there's a hiccup. And so I think for us to move forward in a logical and confident nature, I think the more specific we can be about what lands are developable and how they're developable is going to cut the hassle and the fighting and infighting with the land management division, I think, down to a reasonable level, which is what we're not experiencing right now. And overall, just the other thing too is obviously there's been a number of questions come across my desk about some of the big game overlay questions about what's going on in the South Eugene properties. I think for my purview, seeing a lot of the questions come across my desk about 40 acres, 80 acres, habitat plans and all that kind of stuff that are intersecting with developability. I think for simplicity, in my purview, I'd like to just see those lands taken off the map as undevelopable. I think that'd be the simplest approach that would get people on the same page, and we wouldn't have to deal with all that fighting later. So those are just my two thoughts for now. I've got some more questions, but I'll let the microphone pass to somebody else.
Would you like a response to any of that?
Absolutely, yeah, certainly.
So in terms of, those are both excellent points. And in terms of getting down to a more refined level of analysis, you're absolutely right. So urban reserves started at looking at 27,000 acres of land, analyzing it for the most suitable land to select for urban reserves, then looking at that suitable land, what made sense for urban reserves. Now it's sitting there in reserve. We have identified 5,900 acres of developable land, but as you identified, some of that may have hidden constraints that we don't know about. Some have constraints that we know about, and we have not identified that as developable. Some may have some hidden constraints that we can't at this sort of higher level of analysis know about yet. So if we need to expand for urban reserves, at that point, we will. Oh, for urban growth boundaries. See, even with all these binders, I still do that. Thank you, Lindsay.
Imagine what it's like for others.
I know, exactly. I'm empathetic. So at the point where our analysis shows that we need to expand for the UGB, then we will look within urban reserves for those areas first that have the least constraints. So we feel like even though there's no perfect area to expand into, there are constraints all around the UGB, as we've discussed previously, right? With urban reserves in place, it gives us more options to do that in a better way than if we didn't have urban reserves and we had to go the old route of only selecting exception areas to expand into, which are diffuse, separated, not connected to the UGB, harder to serve, more expensive to develop, even. So it's not a perfect answer, but we feel like this first level of analysis is setting us up for the next level of study. So it is fully planned to do that, but it gets a little bit, I think, to your question. And the other piece about big game habitat is that that is, of course, an option and a route that we could have taken to simply say everything that's identified as ODFW, big game habitat, is undevelopable and should not be included in urban reserves. But instead, because there are so many complications with that, it's a similar process where instead of saying it doesn't make sense to include any of that land, we're saying it makes sense for us to study that land at the UGB analysis level. If we're going to bring in any of that land that has big game habitat in a similar way that Ben did it in coordination with Deschutes County and ODFW, look at conservation measures, development density incentives, things like clustering, things that make sense at the UGB level for balancing those big game habitat issues.
Well, that's a great way to look at it, too. And I think my only question or response to that would be that most of those investigations are not going to be proactive on our part. They're going to be reactive for someone who says, hey, I've got this idea for this land, and that's going to generate the responses that you're describing. So I guess my desire would be that we would be ahead of that game a little bit so that we're not wasting people's time and dashing their hopes and making them spend more money than what they should do if we would have done our job a little more thoroughly. So that's just kind of my response, but thank you very much.
Thank you. And, you know, for the sake of continuity, I'm going to step in with a couple of follow-ups, and pardon me to the rest of the board. I usually ask the other board, but this is a directly continuation of that. And looking at the South Hill, the orange on the south there, a lot of that is big game habitat, right? Which is 40 or 80 acre developments. What is it being counted as in the urban growth planning in terms of the numbers of residential lots in those areas?
So we've done a really detailed capacity analysis, so I can't tell you so what I can tell you is the capacity analysis was based on how things were developing inside the UGB based on size of lot, topography, and elevation. So those lots that are higher elevation and have more topography have lower density development. So typically, the areas that are in the South Hills have lower density capacity for our capacity analysis than some of the flatter areas with larger lots. That said, the areas that were removed from consideration in our suitability analysis that were farther out in the South Hills generally had lower densities even. So the topography and the land uses were taken into consideration with the capacity analysis, but I can't give you one number.
Well, you do a superb job of trying to explain things in terms that people understand. And quite often, you know, you say you got tripped up on these things. Well, you know, I'm not a land use professional. That's not you. That's what you do for a living. I don't do that for a living. But I'm required to interpret what you do for a living to make certain that future generations are not hampered by decisions that I make today based on your input, based on you already being tripped up on these documents that the common person would not even crack them. You know, they've been available for people to inspect for, you said, quite some time now. How many people have really thumbed through all of those? And I'd expect the numbers, if not that, very, very close to that, because that's a pretty monumental task. So my question, back to the big game habitat, which is 40 or 80 acres per residential development right now. You're saying you're mitigating it somehow. You're using a number not 40 acres or 80 acres, but some other number that seems maybe, I'm hoping that it's not an arbitrary number, and I'm hoping, this is what I'm really hoping, is that the numbers are achievable. That if you say that we can put X number of residential developments on these orange areas in the south here, then we really can. That we won't get 15 years down the road or 12 years down the road and people hit dead ends and say, no, well, really, they thought they could, but they can't. That's what and this is even more elementary than the wonderful way you put it. I'm trying to make it in my language, which is, can this really, truly, is it factual that we can develop this? Or is it just a hypothesis that, if some future Board of County Commissioners changes the rules, we can develop it? But right now, as the rules are right now, we couldn't. But we're hoping they will someday. Emily, you're up at the table now.
Just a couple of points I think that would be worth making to that same audience. One is that urban reserves doesn't change how the land is used or what, it remains county land subject to whatever it is subject to right now or what you may subject it to later. So if you do adopt protection measures that enable greater than 1 per 40 or 1 per 80, those would be subject to that regulation. In the same sense, if the land is ever brought into the urban growth boundary, at that point in time, the city can look at it, the city and county can look at it together, and it's just a different weight. So at that point, you're looking at, we could urbanize it and put housing on it. Balancing the factors in favor, it's habitat versus housing. Perhaps, there's 4 factors you have to consider and balance. You apply those 4 factors now compared to the highest and best use for it now, which is forest or ag. At the time of urban growth boundary, we can be, if the policy choice is made, a little more aggressive with the densities and the way that you can allow housing on it. So the best model for that is how the city has treated it in the past, land similar to it. It's the best we can do. And I think we do have, for us, very low densities assigned to it, by no means as low as 1 per 40 or 1 per 80 acres. But that's why it's reasonable to assume more density for it and the future urbanization of it than what you can allow right now.
And Lindsay and Rachel, you explained that to me very thoroughly a couple of months ago, and I understood it. And it does make a great deal of sense to deal with it later, to get through this process right now. But as I look at it pragmatically, a house I live in Bethel. You know where Bethel is? Out there, way out there. Mm-hmm. It's not up there. It's way out there. A house down the block from me just sold for $500,000 not too long ago, out in Bethel. What is going on with our land values? And at the same time, we're saying, well, we'll deal with this later. We'll say, well, maybe we can add more housing, residential stock that's not inside the current urban growth boundary. But in the meantime, cities of similar size to Eugene, not too far away, don't have tract houses in Bethel going for $500,000. Who can afford that? Whoever will be able to. So my concern that I speak out loud vociferously, and my heart's beating really hard as I talk about this, is what we are doing and failing to do for future generations regarding the availability of land. When we look at people in tents out there, how many of those people, if houses were more available and less expensive, how many of those people in tents wouldn't be in tents? It'd be in a house. Now I don't know that number, and you said you can't assign a number to how many lots were on each portion of these orange splotches on the south end. But the fact is, we have people living in tents if housing were more readily available. People in South Carolina are laughing at us because people in don't live in tents as much there. They can afford houses there. People can't afford houses here. Now, certainly people are living in tents for reasons other than not being able to get in or out of a house. But the fact is, if we aren't considerate for future generations right now, not unlike what maybe I was doing back in 1995 when I was a city councilor, allowing some things to happen that made it look like this today, what can we do today to make sure that this doesn't happen even worse in the future? And that's where my heart is beating loud right now. I'm not trying to criticize your work, because your work, everything around us is constrained. We have hills, you have wetlands, you have Fern Ridge Lake, and everything in between here and there. You have Class A farmland, you have forests. Everything around us is concerned. But what can we do to make certain that this metropolitan area, this is the metropolitan area? Oak Ridge isn't, Florence isn't, Pleasant Hill adjacent, probably will be at some point if we're not careful. What can we do to make this a more affordable place to live? And this is a point in time when we have to really consider that. When we're looking at future places where people are going to build houses, With the people graduating from high school this year, next year, in the next few years, if they want to live in their hometown, will be wanting to build, they may not build those houses, but they'll live in some of the houses that are inside of the white area, while other people build houses out in the more expensive areas that we're designating right now. How can we do that? How can we make sure that future generations can afford to live here? And this is the point in time when we have to think about it, when we're deciding this is the next 27 years, is that what we're looking at right now? 27 years. We're looking at 27 years from now, not this week, next week, not what Landwatch decides to do, because we made it easy to challenge. So that's where I am right now.
So, sorry. I didn't know if there was actually a question. I wanted to respond, but I didn't actually know if there was.
Well, that's actually a prelude to when I put the brakes on us passing this ordinance later on today, but go ahead.
I would say that this is the first step in holding the lands in reserve that on balance, we have evaluated as the most suitable for future urbanization. That doesn't mean they are all easy, but when we evaluate all the criteria that's required for us to evaluate by the state at the urban reserve level, these are the most suitable lands to include in urban reserves. So I'd say it's only one piece of the puzzle, the very important complex puzzle that you talked about. This is one piece and the first piece.
Then my suggestion, and my thought on this is, if those properties in the south there currently are in places where it has to be on 40 acres or 80 acres in order to build a single residence, let's just count that as one residence per 80 acre. And then, which would make us have to look a little bit further out for more urban reserves. You know, maybe that the edge of the orange there, maybe we need to shrink that map down so we can go out a few more miles in order to accommodate the amount of growth that we expect in the metropolitan area.
We felt like, and Lindsay, you can elaborate on this, and Emily as well, if you wish, that those are the development requirements within the county now, but once land, and that will be the density requirements as long as the county is operating the same way. But once that land is considered for urban reserves, then it will be evaluated with urban levels of densities, and we will do a Goal 5 analysis on it for urban levels of densities. So just because that's the density limit now does not mean that if that land is evaluated and goes through a state-directed Goal 5 analysis, that will need to be the density as we move forward once it comes into the urban growth boundary.
And you explained that to me thoroughly.
So that's the reason why we felt like it wasn't necessarily the right direction to keep those densities on that land for urban reserves.
But somehow in this analysis, we're able to demonstrate that we have a 27-year supply of residential land.
Yeah.
Even though we don't really know if that is going to be available, we think that we'll be able to reanalyze it based upon the fact that it's urbanizable and not outside urban growth boundaries.
Another tool that the city might be able to use down the road is applying their zoning regulations to these properties. Right now, there's no zoning regulations. It could be low-density residential, it could be high-density residential, it could be commercial, industrial. None of that has been figured out at this point. So they're generalized, very detailed, but it's one view of looking at. We had to pick one way to go forward and move with what the density could be. But there's other tools when the urban growth boundary does expand where they could have high density and open space and schools, and there's a lot of different factors that will come into play at that point. So
There are. The hypotheses are abound on what could happen.
yeah.
But we're doing it in a relatively constrained geographic area. And what if we can't do it? Then somebody down the road is going to have to figure it out again. It's going to be more difficult down the road. And my point is that now is the last time we're going to have a chance to look at this. because if we make that if we pass this ordinance, once this ordinance is passed, then future generations will say, they passed that ordinance back in 2023, and boy, we got to live with it today. And we here at Landwatch say, you know, you passed that ordinance, and we disagree with what you're doing.
Well, and part of the ordinance is the direction that the board gave us to look at the sufficiency of urban reserves no later than 10 years after our first UGB expansion analysis. So I think that was a concern when we got that direction, that we weren't, whether or not we were sure that this was truly a 27-year urban reserve. So it gives us that backstop to be able to look at whether it's the right land and the right amount of land included in urban reserves.
And that 10-year backstop is something. It's not, you know, it really doesn't satisfy the needs that I'm talking about. Because who would have thought that a house in Bethel, I mean, this is a Bethel school district, you know, all those bad things, that we go for $500,000. Anyway, the rest of the board, what else? Commissioner?
Hey, I just have a question. So, because, well, it used to be my district, but out towards the west there, towards Fern Ridge, is that, because there's a lot of wetlands out there, right? And so are we gonna use that same logic for the wetlands that, if it gets zoned, maybe we can build on it? I mean, what are the plans there? Because right now, as you guys know, wetlands are, a no-go. You can't build there. How do you put a possibility of being able to build on there now?
So we have included a series of wetlands that are included in local, state, and national inventories as undevelopable land. So wetlands that are included in the West Eugene Wetlands Plan as protect or restore are considered undevelopable, so we have not put any capacity on those, as well as Goal 5 wetlands that are in the Metro Plan and wetlands that are included in the National Wetlands Inventory. So all of those wetlands that are parcel-specific that we have included in those inventories, we have not included them as part of the developable land that we're counting towards urban reserves.
Okay, so when I'm looking at that picture, which I have up here, if you go north, is that why you don't show any of it north? Because that's, I mean, if you go off of, like Clear Lake in that area, I mean, there's
Right.
grass
so-
green.
So the land north, like south of the airport, is that where you're looking? The land south of the airport, we studied, and we decided that it wasn't suitable for urban reserves because primarily of the 100-year floodplain and flood hazard land there from Amazon Creek, which was also lands that had significant wetlands on it and significant riparian areas. And it was also directly south of the airport, so it had airport impacts. So because of all of those things primarily, that's why it wasn't included. It was a very wet area. Some of these areas that are identified as urban reserves, if it's a large lot and it has some wetlands on it, then that lot may be included because it still has some developable land on it. But the land that's wet on it and identified in an inventory is not counted towards the 5,900 developable acres in urban reserves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And that was what I was wondering, actually. So do we have a map of what the original 27,000 acres looked like?
We
And,
do,
and I,
yes.
I didn't
And I don't
see
have
it.
it as part of this presentation.
oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's just an indicator. If you guys started at 27,000 with that line, and then you end up at 5,900, there's a lot of restrictions, and I don't see those lightening up in the near future, but I like your positivity.
I'll mention, we did start with a significantly large area. We took some areas out of that, as Rebecca was saying, and found that we actually needed more area. So that's why and notified those property owners and went out towards Fisher Road a little bit more because there was, on balance, there was development potential to meet the correct amount of acreage.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to addressing the south area, which first came up in discussion. Of course, a lot of that is within my district that I represent. I live out there. I know this area very well. I know the topography very well.
I've lived here 50 years.
And it is very much like Churchill. It's basically like the backside of Churchill. And so I guess I'm asking you and others, are you discussing that because you're determining the backside of that hill is not going to produce enough housing? Or what is the hindrance, I guess, in my mind? Because if there's a request that we need more housing and more doors, which we know we do, and you talk about that all the time, we all do, what is the hindrance of that particular expansion? Because if we don't move forward with this ordinance, say today or in the future, and ask for adjustments, there is definitely folks out there that will ask us, why are we delaying? Because the more we delay, the less housing that can come into the urban growth boundary and be built. And so I want to be very cognizant of that. This was brought up in past years. There are people that are very interested in ensuring that there is capacity. And we could keep tweaking this, I suppose. We could keep asking for it to be tweaked. But it will continue to delay development eventually in the urban reserves.
I'll view that as a question to me, and the area in orange right there. If we could guarantee urban densities like we have in Bethel, the same kind of residential density that we have in Bethel, then I love that area. It's expensive to build on slope. It's difficult to get water up there. It's difficult to get sewer up there. Yeah, all the things are difficult. It's expensive. But I love it if we can build to the same kind of density. But based upon the way that land is zoned right now, we can't. And what we're hearing is that we should be able to, once it becomes in the urban reserve, that it'll be easier to do it. But I'm not convinced that it is. I'm not convinced that we're going to have the same kind of residential density that we need, the same kind of residential density that we enjoy, and I'll say the word enjoy, in multifamily housing and in single-family housing that we enjoy in the flatter areas of that Eugene's already expanded into. If somebody can say, yes, we'll build with the same density of single-family and multifamily residential in that area there that we do out there toward Irvington Drive, out there toward Clear Lake Road, this side of the orange where I live, yeah, let's go ahead. Boy, I'm all for it. But nobody's guaranteeing that. What we're saying is that, maybe. That's what we're saying.
May I respond?
Sure.
I understand. I think I understand. So the argument I hear you making is if it can't be at as high of a density as flat land on the west side, then it's not worth including in the mapping. And we have to know that not all the area that's being proposed is going to be at full high-density mark. It's going to be a variety. Some of it's going to be industrial. It's going to be different kinds of zoning, not just residential. And to exclude something because it may be low or medium residential that people also want to develop and purchase, it doesn't fully make sense to me.
Then I need to be a little bit more succinct. That I don't expect it ever will be developable at that same density because of the slope, because of the constraints that are around. But I don't want to be counted at that level of density. And I'm not getting assurances from you that it's not being counted at a higher level of density than it ever will be actually developed. So that we're adding acreage and saying we're going to get this many residential dwellings per acre, but we're never going to get that many per acre because of the constraints that we know of. Every time we look to build, over the last 10 years, we've tried to build a number of houses out in that area. And it's difficult to build even a single house, let alone a subdivision. So, yeah, I'm all for it. I'm not saying take it off of there. I'm saying, but if it's not accurate, we need more than you're giving us. So that's all I'm saying.
A couple of things I want to, and you'll remember this from urban growth boundary, but I'll kind of go over this a little bit more so that folks at home and others who were involved in UGB might know this. Like when you are setting an urban growth boundary, if you don't have urban reserves at all, there's a state law that says as you do growth planning, as you extend urban areas out into the rural areas, you have to expand first priority onto whatever the county has already allowed development on. Exception land, marginal land, stuff with bad soils, and the very last stuff you can take in is the really good soil stuff. And when you get into high-value ag land, we break it down further, literally into soil type. And so that even if you want to expand in a certain area, you couldn't just add orange in a different place without adding all this orange has to be in first, and then you could add more. So just to make that clear, you can't just take some off and put another on because this is based on that priority. All the exception land has to come in. All the land that, as the county has allowed more development on, that means that's the land we have to bring in first, which is a little awkward because a lot of the time that's not going to redevelop very, very much. It's already got, mansion and a bunch of land that nobody wants to subdivide. But we have to bring it in first, and we have to assign densities to it that match our trends. So that's one thing. The other thing is if we had some sort of basis to assume development at a lower level than we already are on, say, these South Hills lands, what it would do is there are two kind of factors here. One is this board directed its staff to not go onto the highest value farmlands. That's why we're at this weird 27 year with this land. The board said, avoid that super high value stuff. And when you do that, it's not 30. We didn't just say we're going to find 30 years. We said we're going to, the 30 years is the maximum you can plan for under the law. It's anywhere between 10 and 30 years. If we did 30 years, we'd be taking in high value farmland plus this. If we lower density, this just becomes a 12-year, 15-year urban reserve. The other just little factual thing that's kind of driving me crazy is I want you to know, this orange land adds up to what we think would be 27 years worth of growth. It's the best educated guess we can come up with. The state says we have to assign a number to it. It's going to be proven wrong. We all know that. We still have land in the urban growth boundary. So when we're talking about planning out, this would result in 36 years of growth, counting what we still have in our urban growth boundary in terms of years. So we're talking 36 years. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we start using some of this, then we can add more, but always between 10 and 30 years.
And something you said is really important. We all know it's not accurate. Mm-hmm. That's not exactly what you said. I didn't write the quote down.
I'd be happy to say those words.
Okay, then I'll put quotation marks around it and I'll shout it from the hilltop. So we all know it's not accurate. So we're making our best guess at this at all times. And what I'm hoping for is that we make a better guess at it. Something that really is a little bit more realistic in terms of where we actually will be able to build the number of front doors, is what I call them. I didn't make that up, somebody else made it up, but the number of front doors that it's going to require, that we're going to have to accommodate the people who graduated from high school, the people who want to move here from South Carolina, I've been talking to people who just moved here from South Carolina and said, what's with the homeless people here? Well, don't you have it in South Carolina? No, we don't have it in South Carolina. Well, so what I want to make certain is that we are doing, so we don't have a future board sitting here saying, well, why did they do that? Why couldn't they have just expanded in some of the quote, high-value farmland in order to build front doors instead of making it this expensive to develop low-density hillside? So, and that's a discussion if we don't have it now, somebody else is going to have it, and it's going to be more difficult for somebody else to have it than it is for us to have it. So, and certainly it's, you and I sat around that big table, what was that, 2010, when we first started looking at that?
It was the entire year, like
It was-
365 days of sitting around that.
I remember doing nothing else for a long, long time than sitting around the Envision Eugene room, where there were about 75 of us in there. That was a long time ago, and we're trying to make our best guesses at the time. And then the technical advisory group got involved, and Sean Bowles and a bunch of people started talking about things where you couldn't build and making it a longer conversation, which brings us to today, this late in the game, and more than ever, because it wasn't this bad 5 years ago, more than ever, we have people who are not able to afford first, last, and security, because first, last, and security is so high based on land values here in our town. Okay, go ahead. Commissioner Buck.
That's all right, go ahead.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of clarifying, just making sure, since this is still relatively new for me as a subject area. If I understand, essentially what we're doing here is making it possible, when the time comes to expand into the UGB, to then assess for the kinds of development, including different levels of housing density. So this, as you said, this is the first step. We're not deciding it is or isn't yay many front doors. We're making it possible for somebody else, if these areas should be brought into the urban growth boundary, to then have that assessment made.
Well, we would be helping with the next level of assessment once we found out if we needed to expand the UGB, how many acres, what the uses would be for, whether it's industrial or housing, the different types of needs, and then doing the next level of assessment there. We would not be building any of those buildings directly.
And then, where in all the process of identifying these lands and projecting need and how many years of inventory this might provide, where does that overlay with some of the new and really significant statewide and local work around middle housing? Because really, ideally, the whole reason you have an urban growth boundary is because you want to grow your urban area within an urban growth boundary. And so we're really in a very different landscape, literally and figuratively, in how we're operating in our urban areas because of House Bill 2001.1 and now .2 and the work within the cities. So as far as how much inventory and projection, that might look really different because we've now made it possible to build denser in the UGBs. So where does that overlay and how does that impact projections from when this
Right.
process started, since it's
Yeah,
been going
really
on such
good
a long time?
question. We got some testimony similar to that, so we responded similarly, number 7 in your memo. So the middle housing code, what we looked at was 12 years of actual building data before middle housing went into place. We don't yet have enough data to analyze middle housing capacity, but we will in the future. And we have a growth monitoring program so that we can be more nimble and look at how we're changing and how we're growing more rapidly. And so when we need to expand, and part of our expansion analysis will take that data that we are gathering annually with our growth monitoring program into place. So that will really come into play when we're expanding our UGB and analyzing whether and how much we need to expand.
And we're also legally prohibited right now from assuming more than a 3% increase based on that law. We have to wait until we have data, and we're anticipating that we will grow at a greater than 3% increase but right now we can't assume any higher.
Great. Can I continue?
Please.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate that because I think as Commissioner Buck stated, we all agree with Commissioner Farr, we all share that goal of more front doors, but we also know particularly for lower income, starter families and so on, it really is, I mean, cities are cities, and that's where we want to do as much density and growth as possible, and that's where the economies of scale and the likelihood of multi-unit housing and so on that can bring the cost down is a really important place to focus. So that is good to know about what was just mentioned. I apologize if I missed this. City of Eugene voted last night. So both city and county planning commissions have recommended approval of this plan, is that correct?
Correct.
And then if I missed it, I'm sorry. What happened at the city council meeting last night?
City of Eugene adopted their ordinance for urban reserves, which is identical to the counties, except for the rural comprehensive plan amendments. And so they've adopted their ordinance, and it would go into effect after the county adopted their ordinance.
Was that a unit?
It was adopted 7-1.
Thank you. And then the only other question, I know we have something on a future agenda assignment around the F2 land, the big game habitat. We sent that to our planning commission for some deeper look and to really take the time and the expertise to work with staff and dig in and bring that back to us. I think that's on our calendar soon, in the next couple of months. And this isn't so a question for you. It's, to what extent, if any, does the findings from that for us to consider going to be the opportunities for any action we might take then be constrained or made possible by whether we adopt this today or not?
I think moving forward, Amber can speak or correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the city, considering their analysis of the different Goal 5 resources is separate from how the county land use regulations apply to county land until such time, continue saying that, until the urban growth boundary could expand.
Right, because these remain county lands unless and until that happens. And again, we don't know if that'll happen. We're just creating the possibility for that to happen, right? Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful. And then the last thing, because there was so much information and some came late, some folks have mentioned white oak habitat. And I don't see that listed, but I'm imagining that's because it has not been named endangered or threatened. Is that why species, even though we recognize the environmental importance of it? And
Exactly.
Okay.
We don't have parcel-specific habitat direction for studying that under urban reserves. We've studied critical and endangered habitat and other Goal 5 resources. And that's the type of thing that if it was identified as a natural resource at the time of urban growth boundary expansion, then we would study it further then.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. If this board would like to, kind of take a step back and re-review what we, between the 27 and the 30-year, I believe if I remember right, it's been a little while since we had that meeting. The reason we went with the 27 rather than the 30 was that the difference was some high-value land on the northern side.
That's correct.
And we specifically got some letters from, and I'm not sure if it was the Farm Bureau or it was an agricultural advocacy group that really did not want development on that high-value parcel land. They wrote in, I'm sure it's part of the record here somewhere, but I don't remember specifically. So from what I'm hearing is it's possible that some may want to review that discussion and determine whether you want to ask the city of Eugene to reconsider that. And I guess the question is, if we were to go back and say, please expand this further to include more potential development areas, would that be the portion that gets added back first, since it was part of the original, set of options for us? Or, where would you go from there, I guess, is my question.
It's a very good question. We would have to determine what the direction was in terms of our next steps with analysis. We had a series of options that we presented to the board and the council in the fall of 2020. And at that time, we were choosing between the 27-year, the 29-year, and the 30-year, as you recall. And so I'm guessing that that's the direction that we would go in to reanalyze that. But as you noted, that is the highest value farmland was strongly opposed by, it was the Farm Bureau and many of our local farmers in the area and many local folks who prized those agricultural resources. And so the direction at the time was seen as a compromise by keeping out those the very few remaining highest value soils from urban reserves. So that would be a significant consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. May I ask one quick question?
I don't think I can say no.
Just to cement this number in my mind, the area between Fisher Road and Beltline Road, and Fisher Road and Green Hill Road, excuse me, and Royal Avenue and Route F. What's the acreage of that? That little kind of semi-rectangular, kind of state of Oregon-looking little lump between Fisher Road and Green Hill, and then Royal Avenue out to West 11th.
I don't know offhand.
You don't know.
what the acreage is there.
You couldn't give an approximation based on what you know other plots are? Is that, and I'm trying to figure it out too, is that 200 acres, or am I?
I could look in our suitability in it.
And you know, my question on that is, you know, that's really quite developable land. I mean, that is Bethel-ish land right there. I get to say that because I live in Bethel, by the way. You know, it's relatively easy to build, rolling hills a little bit, and you know, but and my question is the area between Royal Avenue and Barger Drive, and then further north, how different is that than the area that's already included in the urban reserve? Go ahead, Commissioner Seneca.
Yes, that was that plot of land I was talking about earlier also.
That was the area that's in the 100-year floodplain.
Right.
Primarily.
So I can assure you, Commissioner Buck, that it is the north, you will get lots of heated complaints, as I've received going into this already, about the farmland there, which brought up a question. And we talked about it before, so that this doesn't take in any type 1 soils, right? Our current reserve?
Any properties that have primarily Class 1 soils. Because, you know, soils sort of, they're not tax lot specific. So any that are a preponderance of Class 1 soils are not included in here.
Okay, so that's type 1, and then what is the stipulation for taking type 2 soils?
So we also removed the Class 2 soils that were directly adjacent to those Class 1 properties, so that it would be a sort of contiguous group. There are some properties that have Class 2 soils that were not adjacent to those Class 1 parcels that remain in.
So there is buildable land north that is not type 1 or type 2 soils, if that's the direction you would head? Must be that, maybe that little piece around Prairie Road there.
Most of the property that's just south of Meadowview Road and north of the airport there is agricultural designated land with lower quality soils. One of those parcels, I believe, has Class 2 soils. The rectangle you see in the upper left edge.
That would be Hofer and Cockler Farms. Okay, thank you. Well, actually, because, I mean, these numbers appear to be a hypothesis anyhow. What if we do adopt this and, I mean, at what point do you have to revisit this? If we're, say, yeah, come to find out we're 15 years out, 18. What is, I mean, do we like to be 10, 12 years out? So we're looking at it 15 years, or how does that look?
If we find that this is really an 18-year urban reserve rather than a 27-year urban reserve. So the Board of Commissioners and City Council could direct us at any time to reexamine urban reserves. That's how we began this process. We were directed by both bodies to do it, and so that's why we're doing it. So at any time, you could direct us to reexamine it, but you built in a policy that said you shall reexamine it no later than 10 years after you expand the urban growth boundary for the first time. And we don't know when that's gonna happen, so we can't give you a firm date with that.
Okay, thank you.
Last time it happened, I think it was to include Jerry's inside the urban growth boundary. Vice Chair?
Thank you. This just occurred to me. This is why I didn't think to ask this before. I think I know the answer, but I'm never going to make assumptions, especially not around land use. Creating, if we were to adopt this, the entirety of what we've identified as urban reserves does not have to be brought into the UGB at once. Is that right?
It will not be brought
Right.
in.
And so, is that then a sort of application by application process, essentially, that the city would then say, we know we want to start to tap into the urban reserves, and then it's sort of where and for what use? Like, what is that?
How does that
Yeah,
process work?
yeah.
We actually have the state is now requiring us to examine our UGB every 8 years. And so we're required to adopt a new UGB by 2026. We don't know if that new UGB is going to include an expansion, but we have to analyze it and adopt it by the end of 2026. So if our numbers showed, and we're already starting to do that work, we're doing our buildable lands inventory now. If our numbers showed that we needed to expand, then we would start the analysis of where makes the most sense in the urban reserves to expand.
So this really is, it's iterative. Each decision makes the next decision possible. It's not a static process. It's not, if we adopt this, we can't ever touch these areas again or talk about it further, or, yeah.
No, not at all. This is the first step. We will be looking at these areas again.
Thank you. But each step is educated by the last step, so. So further discussion? Okay, I see no further discussion. So, you know, your methodology is marvelous. I think that, you know, the work you've done together to bring it to bring it to this point really takes into account some very, very difficult decisions that have to be made, and very difficult areas that we can expand into. I mean, we're completely surrounded. Why did they build a city here? Whose idea was that, you know? I mean, why didn't we build it out kind of east of La Grande? Or not La Grande, east of Redmond? Could have built a city there really easily. But that being said, this is where people want to live, isn't it? And that's not going to change. This is where people want to live. And it's not going to change. And people who graduate from high school here might want to live here. And they might not want to live with their parents. They might want to live in their own home. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to build into this, is as we do make these steps, that we are educated by what we're doing to future generations, by the steps that we're taking today. And we are ruining many of the steps that were taken by past generations to put us in the position right now where people can't afford to, people who live here, were born here, can't afford to live here. And if you don't have a house now, guess what? You're probably not going to get one, because you can't afford the down payment on a house, because houses in Bethel, well, I'm not going to finish that sentence. You know, it's just outrageous what we've done. And everyone's been, well, this is just the next step. This is just the next step. This is just the next step. Each step makes the next step more defined in how it reduces our capability of building affordable residences in this area. We've done it. We're here. And the words that I speak are trying to get us to be deliberative about what we do, not to my children, but to their children, you know, who may want to live here. So, that being said, what's the will of the board at this point in time? We have two options before us. One is to adopt the ordinance. The second is to give staff more stuff to do. Vice Chair? Former Vice Chair, former Chair, Commissioner Buck.
I'll move to adopt ordinance number PA 1388 as presented.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second on ordinance, what's the number?
1388.
1388, thank you very much. So let's have some discussion to the motion. Now, by passing this, we fall into compliance with what the City of Eugene did last night, and it allows staff to move forward with putting this, with codifying, putting this onto an actual map that people can look at and criticize me for the rest of my life and beyond, right? Okay, good. Just wanted to make that clear. So, further discussion to the ordinance?
Chair.
Commissioner Little?
Thank you, Chair. I'm struggling with this. I got to be honest with you. I've got some things that I like. I got some things I don't like. If I could put an amendment in here, I would. I guess the question I just want to ask just before we decide what's best for the county and best for the people I represent is, you know, living in Eugene most of my life around here, it just seems like we lack a real clear master plan. It seems like with this thing we've discussed, it seems like Eugene, Springfield, the metro area tends to keep surviving and keep moving on. Well, we'll tackle that problem when we get to it. We'll deal with that later, and we'll just keep hodgepodging our way into developing this great area we call home. And so I'm kind of struggling with the whole idea of why is it at some point when we have this opportunity to expand this, that there isn't some, like, you know, Chair said about that, probably about 600 or 800 acres in that square area he's talking about, based on what I can look at on just quickly, that's 5,900 acres, and that looks like about a sixth of it. So, you know, why is it we as a city aren't developing some really good master plan, how to really utilize that space efficiently, density, affordably, developably, all the questions that I have. And I'm going to throw a knuckleball here. Sorry, Chair, I'm just going to kind of throw it out there. You'll have to discipline me later, I guess, is I keep looking at an area right inside the boundary of our own town, and I wonder why we don't do something with that. And I look at the fairgrounds property, and I think there's 50 acres right in the middle of the town with every infrastructure in place that we could make a master plan to put a dent in what Chair's talking about people wanting to afford houses and having services. And when Commissioner Trieger talks about having daycare center and services and all the things that each one of us are individually passionate about. And we're talking about possible wetlands and oak lands and F2 lands and we don't know lands. So that's not a question. That's just something out there. I just wanted to lay out there just as what I'm struggling with. And I'm sure there's people out there watching that are asking the same questions.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the discussion. You know, one thing that to point out is that we, throughout my years in the Eugene City Council, we continue to pass park ordinances, or park bonds, and we bought a lot of open space inside the existing UGB to designate forever as parks. These areas will not be developed into housing or anything. They'll remain open space. And that's a part of the values that we espouse here in Eugene in particular, but not just Eugene, Springfield. And, you know, we look at places like, it used to be that you could have a ranch, a 27-acre ranch in the South Hills of Eugene. Oh, wait, we still do have that in the South Hills of Eugene, a 27-acre ranch in the South Hills of Eugene, which if we decided to turn that into residential or half of that into residential, then, you know, we could add a lot of front doors in that area. But we're not going to, and we don't do that. So that's a part of the values. While we're making it more expensive and we're making these difficult, painful decisions as to where we can expand the urban growth boundary in the future or where future generations can expand it, we're not going to develop some of the land inside of particularly in the South Eugene area where there's a great deal of open space, you know, that we're not going to do that. You know, that's a decision that we've made. So that's a part of the values as we make housing more expensive, the people who do have houses, and as we make it more difficult for people to live here, particularly if you work here today, the people who already live here get these wonderful open spaces that we've designated, and then if you're here now, boy, you got yourself into a good club, because not very many more people are going to get into that club. It really is, it's a tough thing, you know. We're one of those communities that people would love to live, but nobody can afford to live here. People would love to work here, but if I move here from Enumclaw, Washington, and sell my house there, I can't buy a house in Eugene, so why would I move to Eugene even though I wanted to move there? We're going to live with that as we move forward with this type of constrained growth on where we build houses. That's a decision we've made, and that's a decision that we're branding future generations with. That probably your grandkids, boy, they're not going to get to live here, or at least not own a home here. Okay, so any further discussion on this ordinance? Commissioner?
Yeah, well, I understand what you're saying, Chair. It is tough, but I'm looking at it from a rural commissioner. I mean, Junction City, they are taking advantage of it. I mean, they're going gangbusters out there. There's a lot of these small communities that are capitalizing on the big cities making it harder to build in and more expensive. So there's certainly two sides to it.
Well, that's a part of the old joke I used to make a long time ago. How far is it from Eugene to Junction City? How far is it? Anybody?
14 minutes.
Well, I don't think it's that far. I think you can probably, if you hit the highway, could hit a golf
work.
ball from Eugene into Junction City. Because how far this way does Junction City come up Highway 99? You know, so almost Meadowview Road. Because if we don't do something about it, the outer communities who are a little bit more aggressive perhaps will do it. And we're seeing that in Junction City. So I see no further discussion on the ordinance. Mr. Mokrowski, this is an ordinance. Will require a roll call vote.
Just wanted to provide some clarity on how we do roll call votes for the
Yeah.
new commissioners. Our past practice has been, we do it in seniority with the chair always going last. So in this case, it would be, and then if there's a tie in seniority, then we do it alphabetically. So it'll be Commissioner Senega, Commissioner Lovell, Commissioner Trieger, Commissioner Buck, Commissioner Farr. Commissioner Senega.
I vote to pass.
Commissioner Lovell.
Pass.
Commissioner Trieger.
Trigger votes yes.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
And Commissioner Farr.
Yes. Passes unanimously. Now, was that worth it? But thank you for taking the time to answer the questions. And these are questions that will be asked. And the fact that we aired it in the open a little bit and in a little bit clumsy fashion on my part, which I apologize for, it's discussion that we have had, and people know that we did have this discussion, that we didn't just blindly move forward with this, that you have presented a plan that really does have a great deal of logic to it. And it really does match what Oregon's laws are, what our processes, procedures, and our policies are. And it really is moving us, as Vice Chair Trieger said, is this step. Now, what it does to the next step, time will only tell. What it does to 4 steps down the road, once again, time will only tell. But thank you very much for the hard work that you've put into this.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
So this passed 13-1 between the two bodies. Okay.
You need dollies for all those binders.
Sharing this.
I was joking with Rachel coming in that my city council packet used to look like that, like all 3 back. And they'd get it Monday, it'd get it Friday afternoon to read for the Monday meeting.
Go to the wellness program.
As we clear up the room, let's look at what do we have left on today's agenda. Wow, not a great deal. We have, Ms. Mokrowski, we have concluded items 8A and B under county administration, unless you have further announcements, Ms. Mokrowski.
No.
We have disposed of our executive sessions for the day. Then we'll move down to 12A, we concluded this morning. Commission of Business. Announcements from commissioners. No announcements from commissioners, okay. Then future board assignment requests. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I have one assignment request. Administrator Mokrzycki mentioned this morning the article in which the governor specifically called out Lane County. And I'll just read our governor's words. She said that Lane County this is regarding applying for funding through the emergency order on addressing homelessness. She said Lane County provided clear, detailed plans on how we would use the state funds. And then this is the direct quote. They just hit all the marks, right? The governor said of Lane County. Strong partnerships, clarity on what was getting funded, clarity on the capacity they needed, who was going to do it, where it was going to be
Who was
located.
going to do it?
Where it was going to be located. I just have to say, they have a good handle on their existing infrastructure and where they need to go. So it's wonderful to see a quote from our governor really naming in particular the excellent work of Kate Budd and our staff and the hard work that she's done with her team and that the MAC group is doing now that Chair Farr and Commissioner Buck sit in on. And I also know that when Governor Kotek was Governor-elect Kotek, one of the first things she pledged to do was embark on what she calls her One Oregon Listening Tour and visit all 36 counties. And I think this quote of hers, and it's in the context of being a little less excited about how some of the other counties were doing, gives us an opportunity. And so I would like to, with support from the board, direct staff, our county administrator, to work with our policy director to send a letter to the governor that could be co-signed by the chair and I, both as the chair and vice chair, and also as the two representatives to our legislative committee, explicitly inviting her to come and see the work that we're doing here and to ensure she has an opportunity to see up close the successes that we've already achieved and the challenges that we're facing that we want to use these dollars for. So briefly, the assignment would be a letter signed by the chair and myself inviting the governor to come and work actively with us as a board and with our staff leadership and visit, since she will likely be visiting the community anyway, to do that in a coordinated and intentional way, that we can work together with her to plan that visit.
Okay. Look around the board. Good suggestion, Vice Chair. And, Governor Kotek was even more exuberant. You were kind of monotone when you said that. I think she was really pumping it when she said it. And it was pretty impressive to hear her. And I wish that names had been more forthcoming on that because, the plan that we put forward, Kate Budd, is the staff person who's been responsible for the MAC group and the meetings that we've had. And we have a full-day MAC retreat coming up in 2 weeks to really begin to solidify where we're moving forward with this. But also patients. Winningham, our emergency department, has been really integral in that. And I think what we've seen is a meshing between human services and emergency that really has provided a template for future action. Because I've never seen things happen as quickly as they have regarding Order 23-02. It's been pretty remarkable what has happened over in that building down the road. And to have it recognized by the governor in such a, I mean, it wasn't quiet. I mean, this was a big deal. And it was all Multnomah County, Clackamas County, Lane County, I love to see that. So that being said, thank you. You have head nods on that. Any further board assignments? Commissioner Lovell.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'm not sure if this is a board assignment, but more or less a follow-up on this morning's session about Order 23041107 about recommending a commissioner for the Board of Directors position at the AOC. I'd like to, I think if this is the right way of doing it, I'd like to recommend a work session for the commissioners to idea specific job requirements, ways to align all of us in a unified way, and identify the best candidate for the job as a team.
Very good. And, I think I could support that if we took it a little bit beyond that and talked about just AOC assignments in general. Because we tend to accept AOC assignments, and we've been, as individuals, granted the latitude to do so. And sometimes they're big assignments. And my feeling on it is my recent one with the LGAC. It's no small amount of time that it takes. Health and Human Services co-chair last year, no small amount of time. And work on the opioids, the state, that's not AOC, I understand that, but other AOC assignments. So if we could have a general discussion about AOC and Lane County Commissioners' involvement in AOC, and what does that mean in terms of reports back to the board as to what we do with our committees? Commissioner Buck a few weeks ago had asked for a discussion on reports back on our internal committee assignments. Mr. Mokrajewski, you've talked about a potential easy step that could solve that issue. You know, the report back on Public Health Advisory and the others. It could be once a month, perhaps, under announcements from commissioners. You could put committee reports from commissioners. It'd be that easy to do that, and then we could say something if there is something to say about it, or say nothing if there's nothing to say about a particular committee. But regarding AOC, I personally have not been as deeply involved with the AOC as I see commissioners from Klamath County and other counties being deeply involved with the AOC. Maybe there's more reason to do so, and maybe if we talk about it a little bit more among us as a board, it'll be something that we can perhaps knowingly put more time into, because it isn't Commissioner Buck, you've been involved with AOC quite a bit, and you know that it takes time, and that it is good for Lane County. Absolutely is good that we work with AOC, because the pooling of voices of 36 counties, if they're not listening to that at the state or at the federal level, whoever we're talking to, then we need to put new people in those listening positions, because it's a powerful, powerful voice, and I think that it's something that we can use to our advantage. So, Commissioner Lovell, if you would be okay with it being just a general discussion of AOC assignments and how do we handle it, and maybe there's no change in how we do it, but just at least have that in discussion. Is that, Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'm just thinking out loud, and I have a question, because first I want to separate AOC committees and work is our work as commissioners representing our county, the needs of our county as an organization and also as a constituency. Specifically, the seat on the AOC board is a seat to help our association, our statewide association. And so I'm somewhat asking the administrator too, I'm trying to figure out where that would live. Our staff is pretty stretched thin. I'm not sure what is being asked for, rather than us taking it upon ourselves as commissioners to learn and study our own statewide association and come back. If the idea is we want to delay appointing someone to represent us, and we want to leave that seat wanting even longer because we don't understand that role in our own state association, that I feel that is our responsibility. It's not something staff can do for us or bring to us. So I'm wanting to understand and also support our administrator in creating the assignment, if in fact it goes through. Where does that really live? Because the structure of our organization and the constraints on our staff, we don't have someone. I'm trying to figure out how that is staff work versus just our own homework to do as commissioners.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not asking for the staff to come back with education for us. I'm asking for the opportunity for us as 5 county commissioners to discuss it in an open forum so that we can understand each other better. That's what I'm asking.
So that's an agenda team request for some time on the agenda rather than an assignment, right? Is that?
I would like it in private, so we could talk about it honestly and authentically, and I don't know what the procedure is, so I'm asking for guidance on that.
Don't know, there's an executive session citation, that's an eligible executive session topic?
What I heard the request as originally was a request for a work session for the board to talk about this appointment and maybe some of the other things that Commissioner Farr had indicated. So I didn't take, as the way I heard it as what we would do is schedule a work session at a board meeting. And then it would be for the board really to discuss how you want to handle that appointment in that workload, as well as other AOC related items.
And
I didn't, tell me if I'm wrong there, but I didn't take that as staff bring us something. It was just staff schedule this on a future board.
That's why I'm asking.
Precisely. So it would just be a general board discussion. I would envision it being just a forthright discussion about what we do as commissioners with what really is Lane County's time. I mean, the time that I'm being paid to work at Lane County is Lane County's time. And I think it's important that I use it as judiciously as possible, that we all do, and that we all know that we are. And I think that this particular assignment, the AOC board, is just happens to be where we are, where we happen to talk about it, Ms. Morgeis. And I think if we could do this sooner than later, so we can get this position filled, if we could have it on, we don't have a board meeting next week, but have it on the following week's agenda, which is the April 23rd or whatever it is, board meeting, that we could have that discussion, get that, make the assignment, and just have a general discussion about what we do and how we report back on the work that we do with AOC.
Yeah, we'll say, I don't think this would qualify for an exec session
Yeah.
based on the subject. There's, so we would need to schedule it for some time, probably either in the afternoon on a Tuesday, or if there's not time on a Tuesday, schedule Wednesday morning
Yeah.
session.
And I don't really see it taking a great deal of time, quite frankly. I think, for me, having been here, I'm in my 11th year, as I said, and I've had mixed involvement with the Association of Oregon Counties. Some years I don't do anything with them at all, but other years, like last year, as one of the co-chairs of Health and Human Services, that was a pretty heavy workload. And I know that other committees do require a heavy workload, but others are just a matter of just sitting there and kind of nodding as somebody from another county pounds a gavel. So is that okay that we just have a discussion on that and bring the order back that we failed to pass today? And as soon as
Chair Farr,
yeah,
this is Diana. That order that you passed today or that you did not pass today has already been voted on, so we will need to generate a new board order and packet and number.
good. You could have the same wording, just a different number. Okay,
It
great.
can have the same wording, but we will need to renumber it. We cannot bring that order back anymore.
All right. Then with the boards, what I'm suggesting is that we bring it back in at the next board meeting, which is not next week because we're down, but the following week. Is that okay with everybody? Nobody's saying anything. So.
I guess I have to clarify what we're actually nodding our heads to exactly. Because what you're saying is different than I think what Commissioner Lovell originally intended. So if it's morphing to something that you said, I'm fine with that. I just want clarification on exactly what we're nodding our head to.
Then I'll see if I can do it in a sentence. What we would do is we would make the assignment for the AOC Board of Directors, and at the same time discuss the other assignments that that already existent. I mean, we're already in those assignments, and not much is going to change the rest of the year. Is that okay? Okay with everybody? Does that sound okay to you, Mr. Markowski?
Sure.
Because you just get a certain watch.
Great. Yeah.
Right on. Okay, very good. Then any other board assignments? Then we'll ask for a review of assignments, Mr. Markowski.
So I just had those two, Commissioner Trieger's request to draft and send a letter to the governor from the chair and vice chair, inviting the governor to visit Lane County and see the work that's happening here, particularly around shelter and housing and shelter work. And then Commissioner Lovell's request to have a work session on the AOC board appointment, as well as a discussion regarding the process for committee for AOC work generally and committee updates.
Very good. Okay. Very good. That, everything? Okay, no discussion of that. Then we have dispensed with executive session for the day. No need for executive session. Any other business? Then with the sound of my gavel, we are adjourned, and we will reconvene on 25th of April at 9 a.m. We're adjourned.